Brett Sturley has been on the program, it was years ago, talking about Convention of States. And this is one of those issues that seems to go on in the background, I'd say. People that really follow politics, particularly state politics, oftentimes are aware of it. And I've noticed it seems to me, this initial reaction a lot of people have that this is a bad idea because this can just blow things up and the Constitution will be completely rewritten. And so that's a fear some people have. I think also they don't really necessarily believe that it's actually going to occur, and so then they don't think about it so much for that reason as well. So I want to welcome you back. And if you would just start off explaining, I guess in a nutshell, and then we can get further into it, the Convention of States, the idea behind it, where this is in the Constitution, and what its purpose is.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Nick. I really appreciate the opportunity to meet with you and talk with you here today. Originally, if you go back to the Philadelphia Convention of 1787, they went through the whole entire convention talking about how to limit government's ability to encroach on the individual, unalienable rights of individuals. And when they got 3 days before the end of the convention, September 15th, George Mason rose up and said, we've got a serious problem with this document. The only way that we have to change it is if Congress makes the proposal to change it. And he just asked a simple question: are we so naive to think that a government that's become a tyranny will take steps to restrain its own tyranny? So we need to give the ability to the people in order to propose changes that the federal government will never propose on by themselves. And so that's where the Convention of States process was rewritten back into the Constitution in Article 5, and it was adopted unanimously by the founders, the framers there at the 1787 Convention. So in a nutshell, the way that it works is that it takes two-thirds of state legislatures to pass a resolution to call a Convention of States meeting, and that has co-equal authority to having two-thirds of both houses of Congress propose an amendment to the states. Anything that the discussion that happens at the Convention of States meeting that's called, first of all, you have to have at least 34 resolutions that actually agree to the reason to even have the discussion to begin with.
So you can't just have two-thirds of the state legislatures say, oh, let's do it. It has to be agreed upon, the reason for doing it.
Absolutely. The agenda and the boundaries of the Convention of States meeting are set beforehand. And we know this because there have been over 400 Article 5 Convention of States resolutions passed by state legislatures, but yet we've never had a Convention of States meeting. So that, again, is more evidence that the resolution does matter. So when 34 state legislatures pass this resolution to have this Convention of States meeting, then state legislatures select their commissioners to attend to represent their state. They discuss proposals within the scope of that resolution that was passed by at least 34 states. And anything that passes by majority vote by 26 states out of the Convention of States meeting, then, just as if Congress proposes the amendment proposal, goes back to the states, to where it takes 3/4 of the states, or 38 states, to approve of that, to ratify it before anything is changed.
Now, of course, we have amendments to the Constitution. As you noted, we've never gone this route of doing it. Now, you mentioned that there have been over 500, you say, different, over a period of time.
Over 400, yes.
Over 400 that have been passed. Right now, where does it stand? I mean, is there one that has been agreed upon by a number of states?
There are several Article 5, and it's called an Article 5 Convention of States meeting because the process to amending the Constitution, both methods, both through Congress and through the states, is found in Article 5 of the Constitution. And so there are several efforts out there. I am affiliated with the Convention of States Project, and what our resolution has passed 19 states here so far. We passed Missouri in 2017 and again in 2021. And in drafting one of the reasons why we haven't had a meeting before is because it's really difficult, and a lot of these proposals have had a pre-worded amendment that we want to have a convention to ratify this amendment. And what ends up happening is Missouri might pass the proposal. Kansas will change it. Colorado will change it. Pretty soon you don't have 34 states that agree with what the purpose of having the meeting is. So what we looked at in the Convention of States project is that what are the problems with the federal government? Supermajority of people agree that federal government does too much, they spend too much, and they stay there too long. And so our resolution specifically that has passed 19 states focuses on subject matter, not a pre-worded amendment. And so the subject matter is restraining the size, scope, and jurisdiction of the federal government, discussing term limits for federal officials, and restoring fiscal restraints.
Does some of this, I don't know, may not be significant, but they're questions that just come to my mind. When we talk about it's got to be the same subject matter, does that mean that it has to be a carbon copy? Like the exact same wording, the exact same? So it does.
That's an excellent point. And the operative language, the reason, the agenda has to be pretty much the same from every state. The whereases and the wherefores and the preamble to the actual meat of the resolution can change, but the operative language has to be the same from state to state.
When we talk about the number of state legislatures that have to approve this, is it within a time frame? Is it within a session?
Not necessarily. Okay. That can be set. It was set with the Equal Rights Amendment. Had a 7-year ratification period, so that can be set, and that is something that is decided by the state legislatures through their commissioners at the convention.
All right, we're going to take a quick break here, and then we'll continue on with Brett Sturley, Missouri State Director of Convention of States, and then a couple of things I want to talk about, and one of which are some of the myths that we hear quite often associated with this. And for a lot of people, the concern that I hear is that they can just totally rewrite the entire Constitution. And so we'll get your response to that and some of the other myths as well. Springfield's Talk 1041, I'm Nick Reed. Brett Sturley, Missouri State Director, Convention of States, with us. I always find I don't know nearly as much about this as people like you do. I know enough to find it intriguing. I know enough to know that it is a mechanism that was specifically put in the Constitution, Article 5. I also hear from those who have concerns. I don't know they're necessarily against it, but there are certain concerns that get thrown out there. And in fact, conventionofstates.com, they've got 5 of those big myths. And I wanted to ask you about each of them. And one of them is that an Article 5 convention is a constitutional convention.
And that is a misconception. And, I think, you said earlier that a lot of people have start out in opposition to the Convention of States. I think that's really instructive, because if you look at some of our national endorsers like Mark Levin, Sean Hannay, Gwen Beck, David Barton, they all started off thinking that, hey, you know what, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. This is kind of dangerous. That's what our opposition uses, and they changed their mind because they studied the actual history, and they looked at the logic, and they looked at the founding writings. So specifically with the Constitutional Convention, that is more like they try to make it analogous to the 1787 Convention, to where a completely new governing document was drawn up. Well, there is simply no authority in the Constitution to do that. But because in order to have a constitutional convention, that acts outside of the boundaries of the Constitution we have. So the only thing that Article 5 says is we can have that either Congress, upon 2/3 of both houses agreeing on a proposal, or 2/3 of the several states having a Convention of States meeting, can propose amendments. It specifically says proposing amendments, which, in all intents and purposes, is equally valid in both instances.
One of the other myths that has never been done before. There's no real rules for it. It would just be chaos because there's no official structured way that an Article 5 convention would operate.
And we've had several, and it's true, it's never been done before, but the reason in some of our opposition will say, well, there aren't instructions in the Constitution on how to operate this. Well, is because back in the founding times, in the framers era, they knew how interstate conventions operated. They had them all the time. Post-Constitution, we've had over 40 interstate conventions, whether it be a Colorado River Convention, St. Louis Meatpacking Convention, where states did get together. They proposed they decided upon a specific agenda ahead of time, and they stayed within that agenda. The Colorado River Convention didn't redraw state lines of Idaho and Utah and California. No, they discussed what they were there, the purpose of the meeting, what they were there to discuss, and the state legislatures have been in control of the process the whole entire time.
The big one I've referenced a couple of different times, that the topic of an Article 5 convention cannot be limited, so convention delegates could totally rewrite the entire Constitution once they assemble.
And that's just total nonsense, and it's historically inaccurate, because again, we go back and look at convention history, interstate convention history. We look at the fact again that there have been over 400 resolutions passed by state legislatures, but yet all they needed was 34 of them to agree, but 34 haven't ever agreed.
Right.
And so that by implication really just means that the resolution does matter. What the subject matter and the purpose of calling the Convention of States meeting, that does matter.
This isn't one that I've heard so much, but evidently it is oftentimes thrown out there that Congress would be the one to control the Article 5 convention, and I suppose the fear there would be, well, if they're the problem, do we really want them controlling this?
Absolutely, and that's specifically addressed by Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 85. He specifically says that basically Congress only has an administrative role. They can name that after 34 states, at least 2/3 of the states, pass a resolution calling for a Convention of States meeting, then Congress can name the time and place.
Okay.
So
they book the convention center.
They could book the convention center. So, and Hamilton even says there that the language is preemptory. That it says Congress shall call. They have no choice in the matter. Mm-hmm. Now, if they don't, the states can still call and name a time and place under their residual authority. So and then again, you go back to just simple logic. Here, the framers put this process in the Constitution specifically to address an overreaching federal government. So what sense would it make to have the federal government be in control of the process that is designed to govern themselves?
Article 5 convention process has no safeguards to protect our Constitution from rogue delegates or big money special interest groups. Another myth, I suppose, as it's listed.
Sure, absolutely, and that again, if you look at it, to get 2/3 of states to agree upon anything, the color of the sky is a miracle. 2/3 of a supermajority legislature, like what we have here in Missouri, is a miracle to have. So it's a very, very high bar to have the convention to begin with, but then the convention itself doesn't have any power unto itself. It can only make suggestions based upon the framework of the resolution, the purpose of calling the Convention of States meeting. So anything that passes out of a Convention of States meeting, just like in Congress, then has to be ratified by 3/4 of the states, so 38 states, an incredibly high bar. There's another, there's not another legislative process that I'm aware of that requires a 3/4 affirmative vote. And I would just like to issue a challenge to your listeners. If there is if there's an amendment proposal, you have to draft it up, but just what the idea is. If you can say, propose something that scares you, that you're going to think that we're going to lose our Constitution, send that to me. My personal email is Brett Sterley, BRETT.STERLEY @cosaction.com. Let me know what your proposal is, and then list the 38 states that will actually ratify it. Because if you look, it only takes 13 states to torpedo any proposal that comes out of Convention of States meeting, or Congress for that matter. And interestingly enough, both parts of the state legislature have to agree. If a proposal comes to Missouri and the Senate votes in the affirmative, and the House says, we really don't like that, we're going to vote this down, then Missouri's vote is no. So it only takes one House of one chamber in 13 different states to defeat any proposal that comes out of a Convention of States meeting or out of Congress.
Now, some may hear you, and as you talk about the tremendous hurdles that it would take, and they may say, well, I mean, you sound like you don't even think that. What's the point?
Well, it's supposed to be a difficult
Yeah.
process, and one of the reasons why it's never happened is because it is difficult, and it should be. I mean, this is our ultimate governing document of our republic. But if you look at the problems that we have, and the problems aren't personnel problems. The problems are systemic. They're structural. The federal government has, through the courts, through executive action, and through just frankly apathy of the voters, has accreted more and more power into itself. You look at just in the state of Missouri, 60 to 65% of the budget in the state of Missouri is controlled by the federal government, and that is pretty much the way that it is across the country. So state legislators, when I first started volunteering for the project back in 2014, I would ask state legislators if they heard about the Convention of States process, and they didn't have the slightest idea what I was talking about. But state legislators actually are the most powerful. They have the most authority in the federal governing system because they have both the ability to call a Convention of States meeting to propose amendments to the Constitution, and then also choose the ratification process and ratify them. So that's really, the onus is really on the state legislators to have that kind of courage.
Brett Sturley with us, Missouri State Director, Convention of States. One of the things I'd like to do after we're going to get traffic and weather update, and I know you touched on it, but the leading issues, I suppose, where you talk about the 19 different states that have thrown in on this, what those issues are.
Sure.
And then also, I'm going to have you walk me through, as if I'm Michael Scott, what this looks like. Like, how does this work? So, in Missouri, what that looks like to where we're one of the 19 states, and then if you get the 34, the 2/3, what happens then? How are these people chosen? Who are these people that would go to this place and time that Congress would choose? So we'll walk through that coming up here in just about 3 minutes or so. Springfield's Talk 104.1. I'm Nick Reed. Now, let's talk about what is it that is in the, I don't even know what verbiage. Is it the application? Is that, okay, so what is on what subject matter is on the application that 19 other states, 34 would be needed, 19 other states thus far have said, we're on board with this?
Yeah, and that just specifically deals with limiting the size, scope, and jurisdiction of the federal government, which addresses more of the bureaucratic state that Congress. And this is something that's very frustrating. Now, maybe not a lot of people know. So Congress, a lot of these agencies, they just appropriate the money to an agency, and here's your agency charter that you agreed to, and they basically just give them a pile of money and say, here, do good with this. And there's really little oversight. You'll see some oversight hearings on C-SPAN or some, if you want to go to a direct government feed, but there's really no oversight that Congress really has and really exerts. They have the ability to oversee them, but they really don't really exert the muscle because a lot of this money goes out to special interest groups. Get money appropriated to them for different projects. That gets a voter base, and that helps kind of preserve their incumbency. So that's what the first area, the first subject addresses, and a lot of that has just come through the courts as well, with an expansion of the Commerce Clause, with the General Welfare Clause, where basically the courts have told Congress that you have the ability to regulate and mandate any area that you really feel like mandating or regulating. The second, discussing term limits for federal officials. Term limits is a popular subject with the voters, not so much with the legislators, obviously. But if you go back in the time of the founders and the framers, they had, life expectancy was around 54 years old. So if you were on the court or you were in Congress and you were 48 years old, death was the term limit. They didn't expect to have career politicians. So that's something that has changed, the power of incumbency. And then the third is restoring fiscal restraints. And so that could be through a balanced budget amendment, could be through making the federal government use generally accepted accounting principles, the same accounting that we have to use every day in our lives. or taxing and spending limits.
Now, when you lay that out, some people could instinctually feel uneasy because they think, well, that sounds pretty broad. But that's the point, though, if I understand it correctly, of the Convention of States itself, is to everyone's sort of like, hey, here's some things we need to talk about, guys. And once we get together, okay, what does this look like? When it comes to term limits, and then the debating of it and so forth, and then the development of the actual language that then would be voted on regarding a potential constitutional amendment, correct?
Absolutely, and that is really the point, because it is a difficult process, but the actual proposals would be developed in the Constitution, in the Convention of States meeting, in a deliberative legislative process, just like what happens in state capitals all across the country. So specifically, the state legislature, and this is really a great example of federalism, state legislatures are in control of how many commissioners they send to a Convention of States meeting. They are in control of the qualifications, how they're selected. So specifically, a bill that we have in front of the Missouri legislature here now is the Missouri Commissioner Selection Bill. There's a 10-person search committee that's selected by the House Speaker and the President Pro Tem of the Senate, 5 members of each of their bodies, 3 from the majority party and 2 from the minority party, that select commissioner candidates. Then those candidates then are approved by the state legislature as a whole, and that is the delegation that Missouri will send to any Convention of States meeting. And that is done all across the country. Different legislatures might choose their commissioners differently, but the main point is, once they get to the convention, it's a convention of states. It's not a convention of delegates. If Missouri sends 8 delegates or 8 commissioners to a Convention of States meeting, California sends 1,000. Missouri gets 1 vote. California gets 1 vote. So there's really not a possibility of any rogue amendments really getting all the way through the process. It'd be difficult enough to get it through that process because there are going to be legal challenges. Congress is going to oppose this every step of the way. So anything that even approaches the gray area of what the Convention of States meeting was supposed to discuss is going to get pushed back and may not be referred by Congress back to the states. So it's a high hurdle. And then you have the ultimate hurdle of having 3/4 of the states actually agree with any proposal that comes out of a Convention of States meeting.
So the proposal that would come out of the Convention of State meeting, that's where each state gets 1 vote, and then if it gets the 75% of the 38, then that language goes back to all of the states. Is that correct?
Well, what will happen is the discussion will happen at the Convention of States meeting. They'll craft the proposal, and they'll go through and they'll present the proposal on the floor. Then they'll break out into committee and they'll debate it, and it has to be voted out of committee. It'll come back to the committee of the whole with all the commissioners. They'll continue to debate it, amend it, change it, and then if it comes up to a floor vote and 26 states agree to that proposal, then that proposal then passes out of the Convention of States meeting, and all that means is then it is sent to the states.
Right, got it.
And then 3/4 of the states,
That's where the 3/4 come
either
out,
state legislatures or the state legislature can select a state convention to which is a popular vote to pass the amendment proposal.
Now, as I mentioned, we've had you on before talking about this. Is this advancing any the likelihood of this becoming a reality? Have we gotten closer to that?
For sure, absolutely. 2020 kind of derailed all the entire legislative session from across the country, but in 2021, we continued to work through 2020 and 2021. We've actually passed 4 states in 2022: Wisconsin, Nebraska, South Carolina, and West Virginia. And so there is, as legislators and as individuals become more educated on the process, we are seeing approximately 1,000 new supporters come to the Convention of States project every single day. So people look at Washington, they understand that there's no central government that has ever voluntarily chosen to restrain its own authority or give decision-making ability back to the people. And this is designed to be a peaceful process in order to make that happen, a peaceful and constitutional process to make that happen. So more and more people are seeing that I vote for certain people, nothing changes. There's got to be a structural issue. So this is definitely moving. We're moving in Pennsylvania. We're moving in North Carolina, Ohio, Michigan, Iowa, several states. And you mentioned this; it's a nonpartisan issue, which is exactly true. We're moving through Massachusetts as well. We moved through the committee process in Massachusetts, and we passed two. Obviously Democrat majority-controlled committees, and one was 14 Democrats to 3 Republicans, and they passed our resolution through that committee unanimously. So they want to have any state and that's really one question I ask legislators up in Jefferson City. I just ask them a simple question: do you want to be a better representative of your constituents? I've never had anybody tell me no.
So what, in final thoughts here, do people need to know? Do you want them to understand? And then if they want to get involved in some capacity, what can they do?
Absolutely. And I would encourage everybody to go to conventionofstates.com. That is our landing platform. We have several resources there for further instruction and education. There's also a take action page if you want to volunteer as a grassroots activist. Sometimes I tell people that I'm a political activist, and they kind of step back just a little bit, and I'm like, no, I'm not talking about put my mask over my face and hit you in the head with a lead pipe. Just like, no, I'm active in the political process. And really, our republic is designed for self-governing citizens, and that's the only way that our republic is going to survive. So, briefly, the one thing that really got me involved is when I was studying about the issue, I was sent to original writings from the state convention ratification process, from Madison's notes, from the Federalist Papers. So I just thought that was something different. Most political organizations will say, "Hey, look at this article in National Review or in USA Today," having someone else explain to you what these other words meant. No, they sent me right straight to the words, and I looked at that and I thought, well, yeah, this is the only solution that is big as the problems.
Brett Sturley, Missouri State Director, Convention of States, and we'll get some relevant links up also so people can start taking a look themselves.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming in. I appreciate it.
I'm here live in Philadelphia at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. When you hear the phrase lives, fortunes, and sacred honor, these are the folks we should think of, those who anonymously gave their lives. Well, today you have a chance to volunteer. You need to volunteer for conventionofstates.com, the movement that's going to save the country. These folks were willing to step up and give everything. We need you to give just a little bit. Go to conventionofstates.com and volunteer today.